The Kingdom of Ulmira is a nation surrounded by four great powers. For nearly 2 centuries it was mocked as a weakling nation, but ever since one hero stepped onto the front lines, it had never once been defeated against the armies of the great nations. That hero was none other than Prince Alan Ulmira, the second prince. However, Alan once had days when he wanted to ditch his kingdom and run away. Every time there was war, he had to go to the front lines, and no matter how he looked at it, it was insane. Just then, Celia, his personal maid, told him that he was being noisy again that morning. She asked if yelling all the time gets boring, and Alan confirmed it. He was bored and sick of it already. He screamed again, expressing his wish to run away from the kingdom. Suddenly, Celia mentioned that it was just fine, as he was now regarded as the hero of the nation. He fought in countless wars and led the nation to victory. Thanks to that, as his personal maid, Celia could hold her head high. However, Alan thought that being a prince's maid was enough to brag about. Celia argued that a prince without achievements wasn't respected by anyone, but she reassured Alan that she still firmly respected all the other royals. This stunned Alan, and he asked why he wasn't included in that. He literally put his life on the line. Just then, Celia told Alan that she adored him, but then she shifted topics. She wondered why he hated being the head of the military. Suddenly, Alan shot back a question, and he asked who in their right mind would want to throw themselves into danger on purpose. He was not some old general who lived off honor and glory. He wanted something useful to him, not just empty titles. Celia asked what he specifically wanted, and Alan's reply was simple: women. Homie fighting for cheeks, not freedom. Celia then told him if it was hard to say, then maybe he shouldn't spit it out so quickly. Alan urged Celia to listen, and he went on to explain that instead of wasting time on war, he could be using that time for something worthwhile. He was even proud to say that he had already stashed plenty of money. He planned to use it to go to a brothel, but before he could even finish the word, Celia put him into a headlock. Alan screamed, wailing at his aching joints. Celia reasoned that she was usually gentle, but even she couldn't forgive that remark. Alan joked, telling Celia to look up what gentle really meant. Just then, he escaped Celia's clutches, and he claimed that he would quit as commander. He wanted to leave the kingdom and retire. Why should he answer to fanboys from other nations on the front lines? Overhearing him, Celia bluntly said that it was the main point of war. She said that the fighting was always done by the little soldier ants, but Alan couldn't help but wonder why the prince had to be one of them. Suddenly, Celia handed him a little report. To Alan's shock, he found that 5,000 Lizard Federation soldiers were marching on their borders. To make it worse, this hinted that he was going too. Celia explained that if he didn't, the kingdom would vanish from the map. Its survival literally depended on him. Just then, he wondered if his capable maid could handle it instead. However, Celia reminded him that she was just a maid, and if he ran, she would go with him. Alan was supposed to be touched by her words, but she was blocking the escape route. Celia suddenly flashed a mocking smile, telling him that it was now time for war. Alan gritted his teeth, then he tossed the reports and cursed at the wind. Meanwhile, in the Ulmira Kingdom's border defense operation, Rochelle, the Lizard Federation's cadet, thought that the border invasion operation would be the easiest yet. The kingdom's expected defensive forces at the border would consist of 500 men. They would hole up in the fortress and try their best to hold out. Meanwhile, the Federation, proud of its top-class technology, would bring dozens of newly developed armored vehicles along with 5,000 infantry equipped with the latest gear. Anyone could see that the outcome was obvious, and no comparison was needed. With that, even the so-called hero would be crushed. Playing a board game would be more entertaining. They didn't even need a complete victory. If Rochelle could be the one to secure the Federation's triumph there, he could break the balance against the other great powers. And maybe one day he would take a seat among the black uniforms. Suddenly, a soldier entered Rochelle's tent, informing him of an urgent report. Rochelle asked if it was already finished, but to his shock, he was told that their unit had been decimated by only 2 kingdom soldiers. Bro packed 5,000 troops and still got ratioed. Rochelle was so shocked that he dropped his cup of tea. He immediately went to investigate the scene himself, and true enough, everything was accurate. They were already within 500 meters of their front, and the soldiers urged Rochelle to give the order. One of the soldiers believed that they should retreat because if they stayed, their entire army would be wiped out. Rochelle told the man not to be absurd, as that plan would be impossible. If they retreated, they would carry the shame of losing to a small nation. He still couldn't believe that they broke through his elite troop. Suddenly, someone spoke from afar, claiming that he had arrived. The prince himself came all the way out there, and he was a bit upset that there was no welcome. He said it was rough because he came all that way answering their fan calls. He then asked if the Federation even knew the word hospitality, as a tiny kingdom would offer tea to its guests. Rochelle seethed in anger, wondering if this was the rumored hero. He also caught a glimpse of Celia, and he assumed she was his maid. However, he was now guessing that these two had taken down his troops. Suddenly, Celia said that there was no tea for the enemy because the Federation was too busy stuffing their own black bellies. Still, she thought it was a shame. If there had been tea, she would have brought snacks. However, Alan turned to her and said he wouldn't actually do something that crazy, as it was only a battlefield joke. Celia argued that overworking would ruin the body, so Alan told her to stop sending him to battle. He was a prince, and overwork was the last thing that fit him. Meanwhile, Rochelle called them pests from a small nation. Though he stuttered, he asked his men what they were doing. Alan and Celia may be heroes, but it was just one prince and his maid. Furious, he ordered his men to behead the enemy and victory would be theirs. Without wasting time, everyone charged toward Alan and Celia, surrounding them in the process. Celia sarcastically called out the soldiers for pointing their swords at a lady, and she asked if their parents taught them any manners. Suddenly, she waved her hand, and a thick fog appeared. As the soldiers tried to make sense of what had just happened, Celia muttered the word "Huka," and the soldiers were immediately frozen in ice. Meanwhile, Alan beat up the other soldiers, but he still seemed pissed for having to do it. He mocked the little Federation ants for having full energy, but he also warned that he was just about to hit his limit with his wish to go home. As he kept beating everyone up, he announced that he wanted to go back and play with girls. He even asked the Federation soldiers if they couldn't relate. Meanwhile, Rochelle observed the chaos from afar. He was furious that his men were struggling against just 2 people. Suddenly, one of his soldiers informed him that the war machines were ready again, much to his delight. If quantity fails, then quality it is. Just then, a massive tank came running toward Alan, attracting his attention. However, he was merely surprised that the lumpy iron was still moving. As the tank went on, Rochelle screamed for it to crush Alan and Celia. Just then, Alan cast a spell to which he said, "Deep blazing yellow like bullets." Bright strikes of thunder suddenly appeared, destroying the tank and electrocuting everyone nearby. As pieces of the tank crashed from the explosion, some of the Federation soldiers ran for their lives. The tank came in confident and left as confetti. Alan was disappointed that the men deserted in the face of the enemy, and he wondered if they were that scared of him. Celia only smiled at Rochelle, telling him that he was very uneducated. She also called him out for screaming at a lady, which she found terrible. Alan agreed with her, but he made sure to sound monotone. Meanwhile, Rochelle took a good look at Alan, the man who became Ulmira's commander at just 18. He was a mage strong enough to destroy armored vehicles in one strike, and he even had a maid who had powers on par with his. At that moment, he realized that he had underestimated them completely. Who knew that a weak kingdom had 2 such absurd mages? As Rochelle was going through a crisis, Alan wondered if they had just taken a long walk from the capital. Before anyone could say anything, he announced that he wouldn't buy into the exercise is good for you crap. Suddenly, Rochelle called Alan a mere weakling prince of a small nation. Celia fought back, calling Rochelle a pig who dared to insult her master. Alan urged her to calm down and wait, as they couldn't kill Rochelle right away. Suddenly, Rochelle also dissed Celia, calling her out for following the prince to the battlefield. He asked if she was that desperate to win his favor, and he even called her a whore and a lowly wench. Then out of nowhere, lightning struck Rochelle, shocking him to his core. Alan suddenly appeared in front of him, saying that he didn't know what kind of great cause he had concocted. However, the men there had families to go to. Alan then held Rochelle by his hair, telling him that he had led a war smeared with his selfish greed, so he wanted to finish it quickly. That night, the kingdom of Ulmira remained unconquered. Alan praised his men for doing well. Despite the overwhelming difference in numbers, not a single one of them fell. He believed that it was because all the men fought as one, and that was why they won again that day. He suddenly turned ecstatic, announcing that he could now go home and party with girls. The crowd erupted in cheers and they celebrated their victory. As everyone got buzzed up, Alan commended his men for defending the fortress. He also thanked those who charged into enemy lines. He even reassured everyone to keep on drinking and not worry about money. It's giving generosity as a cry for help. As Alan got more and more drunk, he told himself that he would just tune out his siblings yelling. The men cheered on their commander, and they believed only a hero would say what he did. One also reassured him that his generosity would make him popular with the women. Alan suddenly took his shirt off, boasting to everyone that he would only hand out booze and food. Just then, Celia told him to put a shirt on, but he only encouraged her not to act like a shy maiden. Alan believed that these days, men prefer women who take the lead gently, and they like those over the inexperienced ones. Hearing that, Celia knocked him down from behind and she forcibly sat on his back. She then grabbed his legs and put them on her shoulders, counting until Alan would get knocked out. As the crowd cheered, Alan complained that legs shouldn't go above the neck. Yet despite the pain, Alan wondered what this soft feeling against his back was. His eyes sparkled as he guessed that it was the sensation of a young maiden's bottom. Bro got turned into a pretzel and called it romance. The men were enamored of the thought of feeling Celia's bottom, so they pleaded with Alan to switch places with them. They thought that position looked way too good. Celia immediately caught up with their topic and she felt a wave of embarrassment. Meanwhile, Alan screamed at Celia to stop because the leg lock was hurting more than the butt. Suddenly, someone approached Alan, telling him that he had never changed. It was Sumanov, the captain of Ulmira's soldiers. Sumanov was amused that Alan was getting pinned under a girl's butt. Alan then joked that it was literally being under her thumb, which only made Sumanov laugh harder because it made sense, though Celia was his maid. For Alan, she was probably the one person he would ever be under. Suddenly, Sumanov asked how Celia's butt was, and Alan replied that it wasn't bad at all. Man gave a 7/10 like he was reviewing a local diner. Just then, Celia appeared behind him, telling him that it was embarrassing. She suddenly locked his leg with hers, screaming that it was embarrassing. As Alan wailed in pain, the crowd cheered harder. This was the story of a certain small kingdom, a so-called hero prince who only wanted to run away, unwillingly spreading his fame across nations. Meanwhile, in the royal capital of Ulmira, the first prince, Roy Ulmira, was informed that the defense was successful. The enemy general and the captives were en route, which was efficient work that he had expected of Alan. He was amazed at the thought of 2 enemy mages charging enemy lines, while Sumanov defended the fortress. That was definitely his style and was very much like him. Just then, Prince Roy's butler handed him some papers. As he handed out some other reports to his butler, he went on to tackle the materials that Alan brought back. He could now get to work, though he supposed it was just damage control. Suddenly, a letter arrived for Prince Roy, and he wondered what the rush was about. As he opened the letter, he remarked that it was all so unexpected. The first princess of the empire was going to visit, and he was wondering what she could be after. Meanwhile, at the imperial capital of the empire, the princess looked forward to meeting the kingdom's hero and finding out what kind of man he was. Back at the pub in Ulmira, Alan had now sobered up, and he was shocked to know that the bill was on him. His men laughed on the sidelines, thanking him for the treat. Meanwhile, the other soldiers noticed that a nearby table was empty. One replied that it was on purpose as the usual event was about to happen. Curious, one of the men asked what the usual event was. The next day, Sumanov and the soldiers went on their usual training. As they decided to take a break, they noticed that it was unusually peaceful, at least for them. Meanwhile, Alan begged his older brother to grant him permission to retire. However, Roy only chuckled as his answer was no. Bro's retirement dream got nerfed instantly. Even if it was a request from his cute little brother, it was hard to fulfill. Alan pleaded his case, thinking that if it were impossible to retire, then a 20-year vacation would be a compromise. However, Roy only argued that the kingdom would be gone from the map by then. Alan refused to yield, so he asked if it didn't hurt Roy to keep sending his own brother to war. Roy replied that he was constantly targeted by assassins from other nations too, so they were really even. Alan asked if Roy was sure about this, because if that was his stance, then he had plans of his own. He would sneak out of the kingdom in the middle of the night. However, Roy only thanked him for the tip and even commended Alan for his kindness. Just then, Alan boasted that if he really got serious, no one but a mage could stop him from escaping. To his shock, Roy had already asked Celia to make sure that he wouldn't run away. Celia even confirmed it, and she reassured Roy that she wouldn't let him escape. Alan was distraught, realizing that his escape route had been cut off. However, if Alan really insisted on leaving the kingdom, then she would accompany him. Alan felt delighted for a moment, but then Celia said she was certain that it wouldn't come to that. This made Alan scream, and he wondered why the hell he was born a prince. He was pretty sure that the gods messed up there. Bro got main character pain with side character pay. Suddenly, Roy said that he should thank the gods himself as they granted his little brother such magical talent. That said, he did feel a twinge of guilt for sending his brother to war. Just then, Alan asked Roy to at least raise his allowance, but he was only told that the treasury was always on fire. Besides, the state funds were under their sister's control. So Alan was begging the wrong person. Alan was more distraught than ever because at that rate, he would never have the money to meet beautiful women. Roy felt bad for him, but he doubted Celia would even allow that. Alan asked why he even needed Celia's permission, so she showed him just why. As his brother was getting beaten up, Roy announced that it was time for him to get going. Celia asked if he had plans, and Roy confirmed it, adding that their guest had arrived. Alan wondered who his guest was, so Roy hinted that his job was diplomacy. If he said guest, Alan could guess the type. It was none other than the first princess of the empire, a guest from a great nation. Thanks to Alan taking command of the army and halting territorial losses, they had been able to receive reparations from their enemies. However, that didn't mean they were secure. The recent reparations from the Lazart Federation were, as expected, a pittance. It was barely covering their own expenses, and if it kept on, their nation would never prosper. To break that deadlock, they must develop the nation, strengthen the army, and block foreign invasions. Only then would Alan's burden be eased. After a while, Roy finally arrived at a room. With his siblings working so hard, it was now time for the eldest brother to do his part. Meanwhile, Alan played a competitive game of cards with Celia. He smacked his cards on the table, and Celia was amused that he presented a royal straight flush. Alan was quick to notice something, and he said that Celia was obviously cheating. However, she claimed that she would never stoop so low as to con against her master. Now that she won, she wanted to move to Alan's neck. Just then, Roy entered the room asking if Alan was there. Celia quickly turned to Roy asking what the matter was. To her knowledge, he was supposed to be with the imperial guest. Just then, a woman welcomed herself into the room, wondering if she was seeing the kingdom's hero. The woman was about to introduce herself, but to her shock, Alan was chained to his seat. Bro got caught mid-50 Shades of Fantasy. Roy laughed at the scene before them, and he mentioned that it was quite an entertaining sight. It seemed like he didn't know his brother's hobbies very well. Alan screamed at Roy not to barge in, as he might get the wrong idea. He was not some advanced level freak. Just then, Alan wondered who the pretty lady was. Celia quickly whispered that she was the first princess of the Empire, Lady Lies Fanrolls. With that, Lise took Alan's hand, telling him that it was a pleasure to meet the kingdom's hero. As Lies introduced herself, Alan stuttered and said it was nice to meet her. He also introduced himself to her. After that, Alan turned to Roy, asking him why Lies came to see him when diplomacy wasn't his thing. The Empire had been picking fights with them for years, and Alan could only offer the punch-and-kick treatment. Lise was amused when she heard this, and she remarked that it was quite violent. Lise explained that their side wasn't without fault, and she insisted on pretending not to hear what Alan just said. Suddenly, Alan mentioned that it was entertaining, as an imperial princess was way above his pay grade. Roy agreed it was true, but this time it was not just him. He claimed it was Alan's responsibility too. Not wanting to participate, Alan bid them an early goodbye and attempted to run away. However, he seemed to have forgotten that he was bound in chains, so he fell flat on his face. Celia joked that her master just demonstrated a graceful faceplant, but Alan argued that he didn't do it on purpose. After that incident, the nobles sat down to formally discuss matters. Lies was amazed that Alan made a mage serve him as his maid. In the Empire, mages were precious and they were treated like nobility. However, Alan revealed that it was entirely Celia's choice. Lies was amazed by Celia's impressive loyalty, and she mentioned that with her power, most would reach for ambition. Roy suddenly chimed in, adding that all of it went directly to Alan. Celia smiled and said that she owed her life to her master. Wealth or power held no appeal to her. Lies thought it was a shame, as recruiting her might have been quicker than recruiting the prince. But from the sound of it, winning him over first was the better deal. Just then, Alan mentioned that if she could keep him out of war, then he would consider it seriously. At the back of Lisa's head, she knew that a mage's purpose was the battlefield, so this wouldn't be easy. Suddenly, Alan suggested that they get to the point. He asked why the princess's visit had led to war, and he wondered if it was just a neighborly squabble. Roy said that it was like a sibling fight over a new toy, but now it had spilled into international politics. Alan assumed that it was not between nations but within the Empire. In that case, he wanted to keep out of it. However, before he could leave, Lise suddenly clung to his arms, shocking both Alan and Celia. Alan told Lies to let him go because if a beauty hugged him, he would be forced to sit back down. Lies was amused that he was straightforward, but she didn't mind that. Suddenly, Alan said that he wouldn't be fooled. He wasn't going to let her drag them into her family quarrel. However, before he could finish talking, Lise placed her finger on his mouth, telling him that he might be her type. As expected of Alan, he quickly yielded and told his brother that he was willing to hear the rest. Bro folded like a wet napkin. Celia let out a sound of disappointment, but Lise quickly called her out for it. With that, Roy went on to explain that the princess came because she was en route to the nation of Ratea. Alan knew that it was past the magic nation of Ruzan, and he asked why she was headed there. Roy explained that the Empire was in the middle of a succession war, which was why the second prince had been recklessly attacking them for achievements. Alan pointed out that it was the same story every time, like clockwork. For that, Lise apologized on behalf of her foolish brother. She had no desire to inherit the throne, and she supported the first prince's faction. Hearing that, Alan understood that her trip to Ratea was to gain allies for the first prince. Lies confirmed that he was correct and commended him for being sharper than he looked. Alan quickly shot back, sarcastically telling her that he was honored by her praise. Next, Roy discussed the main issue. It seemed that the second prince had sent forces to target Princess Lies. Alan asked where, and Roy replied that it was in their very own kingdom. Lise confirmed that it was in Ulmira, which was why she had to leave at once. Alan suddenly sprang from his seat as he had been waiting for her to say it. If the second prince targeted her, he could claim rescuing the princess as justification for invading Ulmira. However, if she left Ulmira and they clashed their forces outside, winning would count as unlawful aggression. They could demand heavy reparations. Ideally, they would avoid war, but if it came to it, Alan would prefer the option with bigger reparations. Just then, Alan asked if he should step in when the second prince's forces would pick a fight. However, Roy said no. What he wanted from Alan was different. Lise said that there most likely wouldn't be a war in Ulmira itself, Celia asked what she meant and Lise said it was simple. The second prince knew that her destination was Rtea. That being said, he would wait along the way, as it was the surest way to strike her. For him, killing her was all that mattered. However, people always go for the easier option. In exchange, Ulmira would gain permanent non-aggression from the Empire. But that would only apply if the first prince ascended. Just then, Roy spoke, claiming that in return, they would provide Alan, the hero. He then turned to his brother, telling him that he needed him to accompany the first princess to Rtea. In other words, it would be war disguised as an escort. He asked if he accepted it, but Alan bluntly said it wasn't his dream job, but at least it meant no more dance invitations from him. He suddenly called out Lise for assuming that he would return with spoils and that the first prince would definitely win the throne. With so much certainty, he wondered how Lise could sleep soundly in her bed. Lise couldn't come up with a reply, so Celia intervened and asked if she could say something. When she was given permission, Celia explained that her actions endangered her own life. Even if it was for her faction, this was reckless. Celia asked why, but Lise only called it a foolish question. She was the first princess of the Fanrul's empire, and for the empire's future, she must minimize bloodshed. If Rtea joined their side, they could suppress the second prince and end the succession without needless war. For that goal, she was prepared to risk her life. However, Alan told her not to say things like that, which puzzled Lise. Suddenly, Alan said that he would do it. He would take the mission. After that, Alan and his men prepared to escort Lise to Rtea. Sumanov informed Alan that 500 soldiers were prepared for the mission, but Alan thought it was too many. However, Sumanov explained that Prince Roy insisted just in case. Alan mentioned that the Imperial soldiers would be part of the escort too, which prompted Sumanov to reveal something. This revelation seemed to shock Alan, but before he could say anything else, Roy suddenly called him. Alan asked what he wanted now, but Roy simply wished to tell him to be careful. After that, their journey started, and it wasn't long until they had to cross the border into the neutral zone. As Lise sat in her carriage, she thought about Alan. He was rumored to be the undefeated hero, but something about him didn't fit. Still, securing him as an escort was a success, and she only had to focus on reaching Rtea. Suddenly, an enemy soldier came running to her window, which only meant there was an ambush. The enemy was quickly apprehended, yet Lise was unfazed by it all. The soldiers were told to protect the princess and not let anyone near the carriage. They were determined to show the strength of Ulmira. Just then, Alan used his lightning magic to subdue some of the enemy soldiers. He was determined to forget nations, as anyone who targeted a woman's life deserved no mercy. He complained that he had to fight, though the ambush was right on cue. He quickly teamed up with Sumanov and Celia, ready to fight off the enemy. Celia said that it was just as the princess had predicted, while Sumanov laughed and was eager to have fun. Before going off to fight, Alan told the princess that going to Rtea was going to be one hell of a picnic. The moment Alan and the others left the kingdom, they got ambushed. The information got leaked, which meant that there was a traitor among their people. While they were fighting off the enemies, Alan asked Lise if the Empire didn't have a strong familial bond. Lise replied that there wasn't, and if there were, a succession war wouldn't even exist in the first place. She then revealed that she envied Alan and Roy as they seemed so close. However, Alan told her not to say it like that, and he urged her to apologize instead. He wanted her to say sorry for leaking their information to the enemy, and preferably she should do it with puppy eyes and show a bit of cleavage while she was at it. Lise said she could do it, but she was skeptical about doing it outside. She sarcastically asked if there was no one watching, which ultimately drove Alan mad. He screamed in anger and lightning erupted from his body. He quickly eliminated all the enemies near him, striking them with his powers. Lise was amazed, and she finally saw what magic the hero used. Magic arts were the ultimate form of magic. There were red, blue, yellow, green, black, and white attributes, and each was tied to a natural element. Using one's mana to reproduce those elements was what they called magic. However, those who mastered all spells of their attribute at every level elevated them into something only they could wield. That was what they called magic arts. Few in the world had ever reached that peak. Alan's attribute was yellow, which was tied to lightning. By studying lightning and its elements, the magic art he elevated into was electricity. A mage's art was usually just one, but that could have countless applications. For Alan, a single touch to the enemy would be enough to paralyze them. In some cases, with enough energy, he could cast arcs of fire at will. Normally, mages fought best from a distance, but since Alan could fight up close, he held the advantage even against other mages. Just then, in the middle of the fight, Lisa's attention turned to Sumanov. Sumanov raised his weapon high, declaring that this was what war was all about. He urged the enemy to fight, calling them useless meatbags. For him, the joy of battle was killing with no holding back. This was the true talent of the captain of Ulmira's knights, Sumanov. He charged at the front, swung his massive blade with ease, and struck down enemies without hesitation. The kingdom may have two mages, but part of their endless victories came from this man's very presence. Suddenly, Alan called out to Lise, complaining that her soldiers were too few. However, Suminov asked Alan what the problem was, as this only meant more room for them to cut loose. This only infuriated Alan, and he asked why they had to do all the work. Suddenly, Lise told Alan not to be stupid. If she brought a large army, it would look like she came to wage war. That was why she only brought about 10. Alan complained, calling out Lise for her easygoing mentality that caused them to risk their lives. He wanted Lise to at least help them out, and it could be as simple as giving a kind word or two. He claimed that if their morale dropped, things might get ugly. That being said, he urged her to hurry up and show puppy eyes and cleavage. Bro thinks it's a buff in an RPG. Lise was surprised that he said all that in one breath. Then she stood up to fulfill Alan's wishes. She called everyone's attention, making sure that her bits were visible. She asked them to do their best to protect her, and she wished them luck. The men's eyes sparkled with joy, as if they had just seen a goddess. If it were the princess asking, then they would fight to the death. They were now furious at the imperial bastards who tried to dirty her smile, and they found them unforgivable. A man who raised his blade at a woman would have no justice. That being said, they would show them how glorious it was to be a man who could protect a woman. Alan was teary-eyed as he listened to his men, and he was convinced that they were good people. However, Celia knew that the soldiers were just as simple-minded as her master. Either way, there was still no end to the enemies. Just then, Alan told Celia that he would finish it quickly, so she should get everyone back. Following his command, Celia used her powers to grab everyone off the battlefield. However, her magic was too strong and it sent the men flying. Alan complained that it was no way to treat a man's man, but Celia argued that he was the only true man to her. With that settled, it was now time for Alan to finish this mess. As the enemy drew nearer, he said that this wasn't really a prince's job. Suddenly, the enemy clashed their shields together, hoping that it would repel Alan's magic. However, if that were enough to stop him, then he wouldn't be called a mage. Suddenly, he cast a spell that released a deep, blazing yellow lightning strike, much like a spear. The enemies were electrocuted simultaneously, ending the fight in an instant. Seeing all this, Lise thought that none of their mages could match Alan, which was why she wanted him. After defeating the enemy, Alan was relieved to finally have some peace and quiet. Celia, on the other hand, commended him for a job well done. Just then, Alan noticed that Lise was awfully calm, though they had just been ambushed the second they left the border. Celia asked if that was within her expectations, but Lise answered that it didn't matter. They needed to hurry to the Magic Nation's border because if they didn't reach the village by nightfall, they would be camping outside. And so, their journey to Rati continued. However, as the day went on, Lise announced that they would camp out and sleep outdoors that night. Alan couldn't believe it, and he asked if she was serious. Lise said that she was, and she reminded Alan that their plan had been leaked. If they stopped at the village as planned, they would be attacked in their sleep. Alan started to complain, as this was the very reason why he hated war. He just wanted a soft bed and a fluffy pillow after all that walking. Lise suggested that he ride a horse, but Alan explained that horses panicked with his magic. Additionally, being on foot was better for handling ambushes. Just then, Celia chimed in and presented some shackles and cuffs. She told Alan not to worry about his bedding as she had prepared the perfect pillow. However, Alan quickly called her out as those didn't make for perfect pillows at all. Girl said sleep tight and meant it literally. He groaned and accepted that camping was fine with him, but he asked the princess if she was okay with it. Just then, he curiously asked if sleeping around them didn't make her feel uneasy. Lise replied that it was true their interests only aligned for now, and they were only temporary allies. But if it came to that moment, then so be it. If she had to play into the second prince's scheme, she would rather that Alan kill her first. A noble's corpse could still be useful in many ways. People would all die someday. If she were born a princess, then she would die as one who had done something meaningful. However, Alan told her not to worry, and he advised her not to say things like that. He didn't want her to act like she was fine with dying for her duty. Sure, her responsibility and cause were noble, but before that, she was still just a young lady. Beyond lofty ideals, she had every right to seek her own happiness too. Otherwise, it had hurt the ones who had put their lives on the line for her. This caught Lise off guard, as she didn't think that people would put their lives on the line for her and not just the nation. Just then, Alan said that it may be hard to believe, but the men there were the kind to risk everything for a woman's sake. He told Lise to trust them, and they would watch her back. And of course, Alan also promised to protect her because someone was waiting for her to come home. As he left, he said that men were simple, and a woman's smile was enough to satisfy them. After that, Alan told Suminov that they were camping for the night. Suminov was a bit puzzled, but he didn't care as long as he could get some sleep. He asked the soldiers if he was right, and they all agreed. Meanwhile, Celia was called by Lise, so she asked what the matter was. Lise thought that Celia's master was really something, but this was nothing new to Celia. He was her pride after all. That night, everyone camped out. As the others were asleep, Alan and his men planned their route. To reach Rtea faster, they could cut through the Magic Nation. However, if they got ambushed there, it would cause international problems. It was safe to travel if they went through the neutral zone. However, Sumanov couldn't help but think that they could be attacked any time at no man's land. By the looks of it, this trip would be thrilling. Just then, one of the men noticed the look on their general's face and he asked what was with his injury. Alan, who had a beat-up face, revealed that he tried accepting the princess's offer for a bath, but he got punished by her. The men then asked about Lady Celia, and Sumanov answered that she went to guard the princess during her bath. Hearing that, the men realized what this could mean. Two beautiful women were bathing together. That was exactly it, which was why Alan couldn't miss the chance. Alan's the type to risk war crimes for a glimpse. Elsewhere, Lise thanked Celia for accompanying her. She admitted that she would feel anxious being alone. However, Celia told her not to mention it as she planned to stand guard while Lise bathed anyway. She then asked Lise if she was truly sure and if she didn't mind her joining in. Lise said no, as she wanted to chat, woman to woman, and know more about Celia. As Celia undressed herself, she said that she was just the prince's maid and nothing more. However, Lise doubted whether this was true, and she hinted that she had a good memory. She kept quiet back at the castle, but seeing Celia in the kingdom shocked her. She asked Celia if she didn't remember those boring parties filled with nothing but empty flattery and pretty clothing. Just then, she revealed what she knew about Celia. She was the prodigy of the Celestine family, the nobility of the magic nation, Celia Celestine. This prompted Lise to ask why Celia moved to the kingdom. Elsewhere, the escort squad captain Go hinted at something about Alan. However, Sumanov already guessed that Goa wanted him to stop Alan from peeking at the princess's bath. Sumanov told Go to relax, as the general always failed at peeking. Bro's done this a lot, obviously. The prodigy of the Celestine family of the magic nation of Ruzin was none other than Celia Celestine. When Lisa asked her why she came to Ulmira, memories of her past came rushing back. One morning, Celia was greeted by another noble, her friend Monica. They were about to end their exam period that day, but Monica didn't feel confident about finishing the practical test. Celia reassured her that she would be fine and that she should just do it the way she always did. Monica knew that, but still she felt nervous. To make her feel better, Celia told her to have tea at their usual cafe once they passed. Monica was delighted and she made Celia promise. Celia and Monica lived in the magic nation of Ruzin. As its name suggests, this great nation was built upon magic and achieved remarkable development. No country rivaled its mastery of magic, and countless mages gathered there to research daily, sustaining the nation's culture. Those who wielded magic skillfully were respected and privileged. Celia was one of those, which was why she got to study at the academy. On their practical exam, Celia performed magnificently, earning her the praise of her mentors. At this age, she had already mastered nearly all blue attribute spells, which made her remarkable. After Celia's performance, Monica was called next. Despite Celia's talent, she was growing weary of being praised endlessly. However, as a wielder of magic, she aspired to become a magic arts user so she could contribute to the growth of the nation someday. Unbeknownst to Celia, a group of men was watching her perform from afar. They thought she was flawless, as she had the looks, lineage, career, and talent. She could easily become a mage, their ideal candidate. In that case, they thought about experimenting on her body directly. They couldn't help but wonder if the strongest could be born from human experimentation. After hearing their plans, Celia refused to participate. She demanded her father explain what human experimentation meant and what would happen to her in the process. However, her father merely told her that her opinion wasn't needed, as this was all for the nation. Just then he corrected himself, saying that this was for the advancement of magic. He expected Celia to know as well as he did, a single mage could turn the tide of a war. If more could reach that level, their nation would become unstoppable. They wouldn't even need their sage to go to war and claim victory. Suddenly, Celia's father held her forcibly, urging her to offer her body for the sake of the nation. He asked Celia if she understood, but she only stood there speechless. In truth, she didn't want to become a guinea pig. She might survive as nothing more than an empty shell. But being born a noble, she knew what the researchers above her were like. Luckily, Lady Monica told her that she knew of a route to flee abroad. She would be waiting at their meeting place, and Celia only had to get there. That night, Celia followed the plan she set up with Monica, but upon arriving, she realized it was all a trap. Not the bestie turning into a plot twist. She asked Monica the reason behind her betrayal, but she only cried, apologizing to Celia. Immediately, the men secured Celia, and they planned to transfer her to the research facility. As Celia was being taken away, she demanded that Monica answer her. She screamed that she was her best friend, and yet she was betrayed. Monica only kneeled in despair while the cloaked men pitied her. Later on, Celia was finally brought to the research facility. Countless hands of strangers touched her, eager to begin their experiments at once. Celia begged them to stop, as she only wanted to live. The experiments went on, torturing Celia every waking day. One researcher asked if there were any changes, and another replied that Celia's mana pool rose briefly, but it returned to normal within hours. It was another failure as the last subject had lasted 2 days. During that time, her entire body was in agony, and she lost control over her spells. Because of that, it was not recommended. Hearing that, one researcher suggested making Celia breeding stock instead so that new promising mages could be supplied quickly. Another researcher considered the thought, especially since the higher-ups were impatient for results. So far, the only change in Celia was her mutated eyes. Hearing that, Celia turned to her reflection on the nearby glass cupboard, and what she saw shocked her. She held her face, wondering what would happen to her. Unable to take it anymore, Celia took it upon herself to escape. There were reports that she had been found, so they immediately went to search for her. They had to catch her before she could reach the neutral zone. Meanwhile, Celia ran with every ounce of energy she had left. She had nothing, no home, no one to rely on. Even if she escaped that rotten country, she had nowhere to go. She now asked herself what she should do. After running endlessly, Celia broke down in exhaustion. Suddenly, a man approached her, remarking that he had just bumped into a runaway beauty at a time like that. It was none other than Alan, and he believed it was fate. However, he knew it was not the time for jokes, so he asked Celia if she was all right. Meanwhile, Celia wondered who this man was. In the moonlight, she could barely see his face. Just then, Alan stared at her face, and he said the most obvious thing. She had beautiful eyes. Celia felt a bit conscious, but Alan encouraged her to doll herself up, and men would be chasing her in no time. As Alan smiled at her, Celia wondered why Alan found her eyes beautiful. Suddenly, Celia told him to spare her his flattery. Alan argued that it wasn't flattery, but he didn't care. He then asked if she had a home to go back to, as her family must be worried sick. But before Celia could answer, Alan immediately apologized. Based on her weeping, he knew it was cruel of him to ask that. Having no home was brutal, and he had seen many people like that. People who had someone waiting but never made it back. Just then, he placed his coat on Celia, muttering that he hated war. However, whenever he saw people like Celia, he couldn't just look away. Suddenly, a group of mages arrived, ready to take Celia back. Alan stood before the mages, and he reassured Celia that if she had no home, she could come to his. If it hurt, he wanted Celia to ask for help, for if someone asked for help, he would have a reason to fight. With a reason, he could save her. And so he held his hand out to Celia, urging her to say it. Celia's heart was shaking, but she managed to say, "Help!" Her hands were trembling and her throat hurt, but if she pushed all that aside and if she reached out to him, then she could be happy. With that, Celia begged Alan to save her. Alan smiled, and he promised to do just that. Suddenly, the mages called Alan stupid for saying all that in front of countless enemies. However, Alan proudly said that if that made him foolish, then he would gladly be a fool. He suddenly rained thunder from the skies, threatening all those bastards to come forward. He would give them the war they wanted. Celia had a home now, and to protect it, he would crush them all. As the fight went on, Celia realized that the miracle of a thorned hero began there. Celia had shared all of that with Liza, and she was amazed by the past they shared. Celia suddenly revealed her true eye, though she said it wasn't proof. For now, she could hide it with magic tools. Liza commented that with eyes like those, people would stare if they didn't know. Celia confirmed that she was right, which was why, after that, she defected to the kingdom with nowhere to go. However, Alan insisted to Prince Roy that he couldn't just abandon Celia. With that, Roy agreed to recommend Celia as his attendant, but only if she would agree. She was also to help him with his magic. From then on, Celia and Alan both grew as stronger mages, but she never left his side. Celia believed that home was at her master's side, ever since that day when he reached out his hand to a girl who had lost everything. Lee smiled at the thought of it and commented that it was romantic. Outside, Alan and the rest of his goons tried to sneak a little peek. He stupidly used a few branches as camouflage and asked his like-minded men if they were ready. This is why women live longer. Sumanov could only roll his eyes as he listened to the men commend their general's fearlessness. They believed that when he acted, he was like a real man. Just then, Alan announced that on that night, even an imperial beauty was bathing with them. If they missed the chance, they would regret it forever. However, one soldier brought up the fact that Lise was a princess of a great nation, and if they were caught, it would mean trouble. Alan only told him to relax as they wouldn't execute them on the spot. After all, they needed them alive to reach their destination. The men cheered Alan on for being shameless and clever, which was why they respected him. Sumanov wanted to stop them, but he realized that in the end, the one who would get wrecked was none other than the general. Just then, to Alan's horror, Celia appeared behind him, asking if his head was full of nothing but dirty thoughts. She then kicked him on the back, saying that it was déjà vu all over again. As Alan was being beaten to a pulp, the rest of his men cheered for Celia. Some asked her to raise her leg a bit higher, while others complained about not being able to see the view. Meanwhile, Liz remained in the bath, thinking it was a waste to skip out on that madness. Unbeknownst to everyone, the mysterious traitor was conspiring with the enemy. The enemy was informed that instead of heading for the Magic Nation's border, they would be cutting through the neutral zone. The traitor said that it didn't matter, as the road to Rtea was long. There were plenty of chances ahead. However, the enemy mentioned that Lise had the kingdom as allies now and that Hero would be trouble. The traitor told him not to worry because he had plans for that as well. Hero or not, he was still just a mage. As Alan and the others were having their own fun, the traitor vowed to take the princess's head near Retea's border. Alan helped the others set up their tents, and while doing so, he realized that it was his first time camping out with his men. Sumanov reminded him that he was always sleeping in inns and villages while the soldiers camped outside. Still, Alan argued that he was technically still royalty, and he hoped that his dignity and pride wouldn't get stained with dirt. Hearing this made Sumanov laugh, and he reassured Alan not to worry because, to them, even mud on his boots shone bright. Just then, some of the soldiers finished preparing their own tents, so they volunteered to help out Alan. As Alan continued to talk with Sumanov, the soldiers suddenly noticed that a little mist was starting to roll in. Then, out of nowhere, Celia hugged Alan from behind. Girl pulled a sneak attack cuddle. Alan told her not to waste her talents like that, but Celia argued that they had been walking all day, which prevented her from having her daily dose of master time. Alan, on the other hand, replied that he wasn't a vitamin supplement. The soldiers were shocked by the scene before them and they wondered what this phenomenon was. Alan nonchalantly replied that Celia just couldn't go a day without clinging to him. The soldiers, seething with jealousy, took out their swords as if they wanted to challenge Alan, but he only called them out for clicking their tongues while doing so. Meanwhile, Celia boasted that being able to dote on her master was a maid's privilege. This enraged the soldiers even more, but Alan only said that none of it was his fault. Still, the soldiers screamed that a cute girl clinging to him like that was a crime punishable by death. Suddenly, Lise approached, asking if she was interrupting something. Alan replied that she wasn't, and if anything, she was just in time to save him. Lise offered Alan a first aid kit if he needed it, which only made Alan assume that being injured was inevitable. Just then, Alan asked Lise what brought her there, as they were still setting up the camp. Lise replied that it was about time for her evening bath, which made Alan ask if that was supposed to be an invitation to peek. Lise answered that if he didn't mind the consequences of being caught, then she wouldn't stop him. Bro's soul already halfway to horny jail. However, Celia was hugging Alan tighter by the minute, so he ultimately said that he'd take a pass, though he was tempted. Even if he managed a glimpse, the divine punishment that would follow would crush him. Suddenly, Lise said that she still appreciated him. In fact, she wanted him to join her. Alan screamed for her to bring it on, and he planned to go to a mixed bath right away. Even the soldiers were blown away by the invitation. However, Alan suddenly felt something dark radiating from behind him. Then, without wasting a second, Celia slammed him to the ground. As the scene unfolded, Sumanov told the princess not to tease the general too much. Lisa acted innocent, and she reasoned that she was actually serious. The journey to escort Princess Lise to Retea had already taken a full month. As they approached Retea's border, Sumanov reminded the soldiers to stay sharp. Meanwhile, Alan told Lise to push through a little longer as he couldn't wait to get back and make that whole mess just stories over a drink. He's one inconvenience away from alcoholism. A few hours earlier, Alan and the others gathered for a meeting. There, Alan announced that there were no major ambushes so far. They stopped the assassins and night raids were few, thanks to the Night Watch. With that in mind, Alan thought that it was time to split into two groups. Celia asked why, as they were almost in Retea. She thought staying together would be safer. However, Alan replied that it was simple risk management. If they stuck together, they would have numbers. But the surest way to protect Lady Lise was if war never happened at all. Alan believed that it was obvious for the enemy to try to start a fight right when they were about to cross into Retea. Lise thought it made sense that the enemy would throw everything they had once they reached the border. That would be their best chance at killing her because her every move was leaked straight to the second prince. The thought of it made Alan smirk because he just realized that the second prince's stalking skills weren't half bad. If the situation escalated into a bloodbath and they broke through them, just guarding Lise wouldn't be enough. That was why Alan insisted that from then on they would split into two groups. One would act as bait to draw the enemy in. Hearing that, Celia announced that she would go with her master, but Alan was against it. The logical split would be Lise, Alan, and her men. Celia, on the other hand, should be with Alan's soldiers, and she should have her face hidden and pass as Lise. However, Alan said that he would rather not have her men near Lise. If they were with the decoy, the enemy would think that the princess might be there and they would chase them. This made sense to Lise, so she agreed with Alan. Just then, Sumanov said that he would rather be with the general, prompting Alan to ask why. Sumanov playfully replied that it was never boring with him, so Alan denied his request. He told Sumanov not to go and raise death flags, and that he already stood out enough, so he should save the theatrics for later. Meanwhile, Celia, who was sulking, asked why she was being separated from her master. To make her feel better, Alan reassured her that they would regroup at Retea's border soon enough. As he told her to cheer up, Celia said she'd replenish her energy. With that, she hugged Alan tighter to refuel her with master energy. He just became her personal power bank. As Celia clung to him, Alan told Sumanov to choose 10 men who would go with him. Before dispersing, he also reminded everyone that if it got too dicey, they shouldn't hesitate to run away. They should run if they had to, as the princess would be safe with them. Above all, they must remember safety first. With all of that settled, the group set their plans into motion. Fast forward to the present, Lise complained that royalties were being told to climb mountains now. Hearing that, Alan sarcastically replied that he hoped the Empire wouldn't send a complaint. Just then, Lise told Alan not to worry, as she wasn't raised under a rock. If complaints came, it would be over his little peeping incident. Alan awkwardly recalled that event, and he joked that the Empire seemed to hold grudges over attempts. Suddenly, Lise shifted the subject and asked if he was sure about using the others as decoys. Alan called the spoiled princess not to get it twisted, as their job was to get her safely delivered. The other group's job was just to take the enemy's attention and run. Alan asserted that they were not idiots, and if things got dangerous, they would retreat with Celia. Just then, Alan asked for Liza's thoughts, especially now that she had no Imperial guards left. She only had 11 hungry wolves around her, and he wondered if it felt dangerous. Lise replied with utmost honesty that being with the Imperial guards felt even more dangerous. And besides, she had seen firsthand that Alan's men were kind, him most of all. Alan chuckled and thanked her for the compliment, and he guessed it was better to live up to it. Suddenly, Alan noticed something in the distance, so Lise asked what it was. Alan recognized a familiar face, and he recalled that it was a mage from the Magic Nation. Lise confirmed that they were near the border, the neutral zone. However, she wondered what the mages were doing there. Alan was suspicious, as they didn't look like they were there for a picnic. He wondered if it was a research facility patrol, but it seemed more like they were searching for something. Alan had a good guess, but instead of engaging with the mages, he resorted to leaving quietly before it turned into trouble. However, just as they were about to leave, the mages fired some attacks at them. Whatever happened to hi or hello? The mages called out to them and commanded them to get down on the ground unless they wanted to get roasted. A ball of fire suddenly came hurling toward them, but they narrowly dodged it. The attack left a massive clearing behind it, which horrified Alan. He worriedly wondered why the hell the mages were firing magic attacks at them. Lise thought it was weird and made no sense, even if it was near the Magic Nation territory. It was still wrong for them to interfere out of nowhere. Alan wondered if it could be an accident, but after seeing the mages prepare for another attack, his thoughts changed. Alan warned the mages to cut it out, and he advised them to watch where they cast their fire spells. He then frantically released a lightning attack, screaming that they might fry the poor rabbits still hiding there. Just then, the mages were electrocuted, giving Alan and his men ample time to run. He urged the men to move it, as all of Lisa's stalkers were about to swarm them. Without wasting a moment, Alan carried Lise in his arms, and they ran for it. Lise chuckled as they left, as she never dreamed her first Princess Carrie would be like that. It would have been nice if it were a bit more romantic. Alan added that he didn't want it to happen during an ambush either, so they should keep running. Bro said, "No time for Riz, only cardio." For now, they must stick to the route and cut through the forest. And after that, they will reach Ratea's borders. The bigger problem was why the mages targeted them. With 4 nations in a stalemate, attacking recklessly would give the enemy a cause and reason for war. Ignore it, and every other nation would use that reason. That was why they would never fire on random bystanders. With that thought in mind, the mages must have a reason to attack them. Just then, another group of mages pursued Alan and the others. One of the soldiers was furious that another bastard showed up, not even fit to call himself a man. Another soldier commanded the others to protect the general and the princess, who were their priority. Meanwhile, Alan called his men a bunch of idiots, and he told them not to engage because they were no match for a mage. Concerned, Alan took it upon himself to cast a spell. He muttered, "Let the hero's path blaze with thunder," and massive strikes of lightning erupted from the ground. The mages were horrified, and before they knew it, they were all obliterated. As the chaos settled, Alan told his men to run out of the forest and head into safe ground. Meanwhile, the soldiers told Alan that they were about to rush forward. Just then, something shocked Alan, forcing him to halt. He put Lise down, mentioning that this wasn't what she said it would be. Lise was just as shocked, and she stuttered as she apologized. She didn't expect it either. One of Alan's men also remarked that the situation was bad. Along Ratea's border, the Empire was waiting with 1,000 soldiers and several hundred mages with them. They were already set in formation, waiting to ambush. Alan couldn't believe it, and he wondered when the Empire had allied with the Magic Nation. Not the Empire hitting invite all like it's a group chat brawl. Elsewhere, Celia remarked that the situation was a problem. Sumanov agreed with her, and he was starting to think that he should have gone with the other group. There wasn't a single enemy in sight, so Celia advised Sumanov and his men to head straight for the border. Sumanov asked for her plans and she revealed that she would head toward the route that Alan took. Sumanov complained that it wasn't fair because he wanted to go too, but Celia reminded him that no one would lead the unit. Suddenly, Goa volunteered to accompany Celia, but she rejected the offer and insisted that he help Sumanov to the border. Left with no choice, Go agreed, but he pleaded with Celia to protect the princess. However, Celia replied that the decision entirely depended on her master. A few months before, Liza's brother Rudin asked if she was serious about heading to Ratea. Liza confirmed that she was, thinking that it would turn the tide if they gained Ratea as an ally. Rudin fell silent because she was right, but still, he knew that the second prince wouldn't stand by idly. Liza would be risking her life. If he invaded again, more lives would be wasted. Liza remarked that she wouldn't allow that to happen and no matter what, she would win Ratea over as their ally. Rudin finally yielded, and he agreed to assign her loyal soldiers to guard her. He also prepared a letter that he would send to the Ulmira kingdom. She must do whatever it would take to make the hero their ally. In the present, Liza was met with the shocking revelation that the second prince had allied with the magic nation. She knew all this while being so close to Ratea, and now, she feared that the kingdom might turn against them. Alan and the others only agreed to guard her because it benefited them. Back then, she promised that Ulmira would receive no invasions from the Empire. Everything was hinged on his succession, and if that scum would crumble, Alan would no longer have any reason to help her. She told him about the succession dispute, but not which factions were backing whom. Yet Alan had now seen the truth. If the second prince was backed by the magic nation, his chances of succession had skyrocketed. This would mean that Alan would have no more reason to side with her. That alone would be bad enough. But the second prince's faction was after her head, and they had tried more than once already. If Alan decided to bring her head back to trade it to the second prince's side for the kingdom's benefit, then what? Behind them were mages hiding in the forest, and up ahead were thousands of enemy soldiers. Their imperial soldiers were elsewhere, and surrounding her were 10 of Ulmira's soldiers and the hero himself. Feeling defeated, Liza fell to her knees, thinking that she didn't care about her life. However, even sacrificing her life would bring nothing. If she just died there, achieving nothing, it would be unbearable. Even if she had to sell her body, she must survive somehow. Just then, Alan called out to her and forced her to stand back up. He snapped her back into reality, yelling that she shouldn't just sit there but look forward. He told her to forget why the second prince allied with the magic nation. What mattered now was finding a way out of the situation alive. Liza asked why, but this only seemed to upset Alan. He already had a guess about what she was thinking. If they killed a pretty girl, it would earn them a favor, and they would win. Alan found it funny, because even his own men knew the answer. Yet, it seemed too confusing for an imperial princess. That being said, he spelled it out for Liza. They only cut down men's heads. That was all they needed, so she shouldn't say such stupid crap. The men chuckled at what Alan said, though they thought it was harsh. She's losing hope, he's losing patience. Liza argued it would make sense if he did it, and she wondered why he would even help her in this mess. Just then, Alan angrily asked if she thought he would just let them kill someone who still had a home to return to. He promised to protect her, and he wouldn't go back down on that now. Hearing all that made Liza cry, and she jokingly called him a fool because cutting her down there would profit him more. Alan replied that maybe his brother would, as he had already done some digging. But Alan never found out which nobles backed which sides, and they didn't know who was their friend or foe. However, he recalled his brother's words when he told him that all they could do was judge from the present. When the time came, they would make the best move. But Alan was different, as he acted on his feelings. That was the kind of man he was. Suddenly, a soldier called out to Alan, informing him that from what he could see, there were no imperial sword saints or top mages there. They surely wanted Liza's head, but they couldn't spare that level of force. That being said, they still had a chance. Suddenly, Alan grabbed Liza close to him, and he asked his men if any of them seriously thought it was worth selling out a beautiful girl just to live. Liza was horrified, but to her relief, the soldiers said no. Sure, their motto was survive first, but they would never sell a woman. If Alan didn't say it himself, they would've. Alan proudly commended his soldiers, calling them true men. He was glad they were his men, and they were fired up to hear it. They even said that tears didn't suit a girl as beautiful as Liza. Liza could only smile, thinking that these people were truly fools. Just then, the soldiers asked Alan for his orders. Alan then told his men to hold off the stalkers coming from behind, and they must protect Princess Liza at all costs. While they did that, he would do what he had always done, throw one hell of a party in front of them. Liza argued that he couldn't be serious because the enemy had mages and 1,000 troops. However, Alan only told her not to be stupid as he was a mage. He wouldn't just lose to some nameless nobody. Still, Liza tried to argue, so Alan asked if she didn't trust him. Liza said he was wrong because she had already seen his strength, but still she couldn't help but worry. Because of that, Alan told her to say something to fire him up. At that moment, Liz realized that she finally understood Celia's feelings. Someone had reached out to her when she lost everything. Because of that, she believed that Alan was truly a hero. Just then, she grabbed him, challenging him to come back alive for a kiss filled with love. Alan just unlocked plot armor via thirst. Though Alan didn't expect that, he was way more motivated now. He quickly jumped down the cliff, leaving his men behind. One of the soldiers didn't want to miss out, and he yelled that the general was being unfair. Still, despite everything, Liz knew that this battle was stacked against him. He wasn't invincible, and if he were caught off guard, it would all end in an instant. However, that would only happen if he fought alone. Meanwhile, Alan counted on Celia to come through for him. As Alan pushed forward, Liz and the soldiers found a path down the cliff. One of the soldiers told the others to stay alert, and if the mages spotted them, they shouldn't engage and just escape. Liz was still worried about Alan, but one of the soldiers reassured her that if the enemy threw everything at him, Celia would notice. The soldier chuckled at the thought that Celia was probably sprinting in their direction already. Another soldier chimed in, adding that Celia was glued to Alan before they left. Seeing that pissed him off too. Suddenly, they noticed that mist was starting to roll in on the battlefield, which only meant one thing. Meanwhile, the enemy started to notice the mist, and they wondered what it was. Elsewhere, Alan chuckled as his partner had just arrived on time. Celia apologized for keeping him waiting, but now it was time for some action. She wasted no time and immediately waged war on the enemy by releasing a strong attack. Meanwhile, Alan bravely stepped onto the battlefield, daring anyone dumb enough to think they could beat a mage to step right up. Alan challenged the enemy troops to come at him if they had a death wish. Furious, he boasted that he would personally escort them from that party hall straight to the gates of hell. Okay, Satan's event planner, calm down. As Alan charged straight into battle, the leader of the enemy troops announced that the hero of the kingdom had arrived. He warned his men not to falter because even if he was a hero, he was just one mage. Just then, one of the mages suggested swarming Alan, but the fog was getting thicker by the minute. Just then, Celia appeared behind them, thinking that it was time to get serious. She was eager to finish her job because then she would finally get all the head pats she deserved. Suddenly, the mages were trapped in huge blocks of ice, immobilizing them in an instant. The surviving mages were in shock as their comrades were freezing up all of a sudden. One of the mage's arms froze and he screamed in horror. He screamed that there was someone else besides the hero, and it was surely a mage. Annoyed, Celia told him to quiet down because he was being noisy. Without mercy, she also froze him to shut him up. Every time she heard those bastards scream, it was just so unpleasant. Celia said, "Mute button IRL." Celia's magic is the blue attribute, Ice Mist. She could turn her body into mist and she could freeze it, solidify it, or give it physical form at will. When her magic is active, she can nullify any incoming attacks. True enough, the enemy mage's attacks weren't landing and they couldn't even see where she was. With the thick mist, they just couldn't see anything. As two of the enemy mages tried to track Celia down, one of them froze out of nowhere, scaring the surviving one. They screamed in fright, but they couldn't do anything about it because Celia kept on vanishing. With the mist that she creates, she could appear anywhere at will. Just then, one of the mages slowly started to catch on to Celia's tricks, so he warned the others to stay away from the mist. However, it was too late as the whole area was covered. Celia, once hailed as a prodigy of the magic nation, was now the mage who stood beside the hero. Suddenly, she unveiled the extent of her powers as she muttered, "The lily that blooms on the battlefield." With that, everything around her froze in an instant. Meanwhile, Alan relentlessly used his lightning powers to defeat the enemy. He gracefully cruised through the battlefield, effortlessly defeating everyone he came in contact with. As he fought, he realized that Imperial weapons were really well made. Just then, he told the enemy troops to try them out for themselves. Suddenly, Alan summoned the deep blue light to fire like bullets. This redirected all the swords toward the enemy, and it rained down on them with immense speed. Seeing the damage caused by Alan and Celia, one of the mages urged his comrades to fire everything they had. He didn't care if they hit their own men, they just wanted to stop Alan. Without thinking twice, the surviving mages attacked Alan with fire spells. However, despite the intensity of it all, Alan only asked if they really thought that lukewarm flame was going to stop him. He proudly claimed that he got Her Highness's fiery cheers on his side, so he wouldn't stop now. Furious, Alan chanted, "Light the hero's path with blue lightning." And like clockwork, the enemy was instantly electrocuted. Celia was impressed to witness the hero's talent, and she admitted that even she couldn't beat him. However, she knew she couldn't afford to lose either, so she planned to help escort the enemy to hell too. Not long after, the battle came to an end. Alan complained that everything hurt, and Celia was just as exhausted. She thought that the Empire's armor was mostly imported from the Federation, and it was made from the toughest alloys. That said, trying to punch through it was just stupid. She then told Alan that his arm was broken, but he argued that heroes were supposed to clench their fists. Yeah, he meant to do that, woman. Still, Celia never said that he had to swing it down. Just then, Princess Lise approached them, remarking that everything seemed to be over. The soldiers who accompanied Lise informed Alan that their group was safe, much to Alan's relief. Just then, Lise expressed how surprised she was that Alan and Celia were actually able to take everyone down. The vast piles of bodies lay before the field and none of them survived. Alan asked Lise if she was blaming him for it, which seemed to confuse her. Alan then clarified that even if they were after her, they were still her countrymen. That being said, Alan wondered if she didn't feel anything about him cutting them down. Lise said no, and she explained that ever since the Succession War began, she had already made peace with it. Alan smirked, realizing that Lise was born in a tough world too. This was also why Alan hated war. Just then, one of the soldiers informed Alan that the princess's carriage and imperial guards were approaching. Celia was confused as she had already told them to head toward the border. However, it seemed like they came to fetch them. Alan told Lise to go ahead and enter the Reti territory, as their job was already done. Lise joked that Alan could pretend like he would miss them, but he argued that he wasn't the sentimental type. Besides, Alan believed that the world was smaller than they thought, and if they kept living, they might meet again someday. Lise was one of the ones shaping the nation's future after all. Lise chuckled and agreed that it was true. As she turned away to enter the carriage, Alan reminded the soldiers to escort her. Just then, Lise stopped in her tracks and returned to face Alan. He asked what was wrong, so she replied that she had forgotten something. Alan jokingly guessed that she had forgotten to admire his handsome face one last time, but Lise only laughed at his confidence. However, she said that wasn't it. Suddenly, she cupped Alan's face and she kissed him on the lips. Alan was shocked, especially Celia. Celia's internal scream reached the next kingdom. Lise recalled that they had a deal, and she also emphasized that it was her first kiss, so her beloved hero had better feel honored. As she finally walked away, everyone was left stunned by what had just happened. Celia furiously called Lise a thief, and she regretted saving her. Meanwhile, Alan thought he was the lucky one. After all, getting kissed by a beautiful girl hit right. However, before he could even finish his sentence, Celia showed him what real hitting was really like. Alan screamed that his arm was going to come off, and he pleaded with Celia to take it easy on him because he was injured. Suddenly, Go came running to Lise asking if she was hurt. Lise said she was fine thanks to Alan and the others protecting her. Just then, Go kneeled before her asking for her forgiveness. He claimed that Lord Rudin entrusted him with her protection, yet he couldn't even reach her in time. Had the hero not intervened, she would have died. However, instead of being mad, Lise told him to raise his head. They had only just reached the kingdom of Rtea and the real mission was just about to start. They must keep steady until the day they can win over the kingdom of Rtea and return home. If Go could call himself a proud soldier of the Empire, then he should see his duty through to the end. Go's eyes lit up with hope, and he was more determined than ever. A few weeks later, Prince Roy received news about Alan and his group safely escorting the princess to the kingdom of Rtea. Alice, Roy's sister, hoped that this meant making peace with the Empire at last. Roy noticed that she didn't sound too pleased, so Alice complained that even though this meant peace, it still wouldn't fill the treasury. Furious, she screamed that the nation was still broke. Roy said that they couldn't do anything about that, so Alice suggested finding a new gold vein. Just then, the butler approached them, informing them that he had an urgent report. Roy was surprised to hear the report, while Alice chuckled maniacally. She then proudly remarked that it was wartime. Elsewhere, Alan, Celia, and the soldiers made their way back to Ulmira. 1 month after the first princess escort mission of the Empire, Alan's arm had finally healed. This meant that there was only one thing left to do. It was time to go to the House of Dreams. Alan hurriedly ran to his destination, but before he could even leave, Celia dropped stacks of blocks on his legs, preventing him from leaving. Not Celia turning his morning wood into morning rubble. She asked if she should add another layer of blocks, but Alan pleaded for her to stop. If she added any more, his legs would seriously break. Just then, Celia frowned at the thought that a prince was going to a brothel first thing in the morning. She asked if he couldn't spend his time in a more productive way, like finishing his backed-up paperwork or creating plans to spend his twilight years with his maid. However, Alan only told her that her desires were leaking out loud. The war had finally ended after so long, and he complained about not being allowed to get a peaceful invitation. Celia argued that he earned no achievements in that war, so working was only natural. Besides, with the Empire's succession war still undecided, they couldn't say if there would even be profit. Just then, Celia was reminded of the little fox who kissed Alan, so she decided to add more blocks. Alan screamed that it wasn't his fault, though he was happy about it. Pissed with his excuse, Celia added more blocks to make him suffer. Meanwhile, the soldiers chuckled as they listened to Alan's screams. He was hoping for a happy, war-free life, but at this rate, his leg wouldn't survive the day. Just then, Alice entered the room and greeted her brother. Celia, having successfully tied Alan to a post, greeted her back. Alice responded with a cheerful good morning to her. Suddenly, Celia remarked that it was rare for her to visit at that hour, so she asked if she had finished all her work. Alice explained that her visit actually concerned that matter. She came to talk to Alan about it. Meanwhile, Alan, who was still suffering under the weight of the blocks, only stared back at his sister. This creeped Alice out as she really didn't know her brother's tastes. Alan screamed at her not to give him that kind of look because it was clear that he was not there by choice. He defensively claimed that he was not into that kind of thing. MC got caught in 4K looking like he paid extra for the deluxe suffering package. However, Alice ignored him and instead she asked Celia what this situation was. Celia then revealed that Alan was marching toward a brothel first thing in the morning. Hearing that, things finally made sense to Alice. Just then, she mercilessly told Celia to add another layer of blocks. Celia promptly granted her request, causing Alan to object with all his might. Meanwhile, in the castle grounds, Suminov and the soldiers started their training. After exhausting Alan, Celia and Alice finally allowed him to rest on the couch. Suddenly, Alice called out to Alan, so he asked what it was that she wanted. She revealed that the constant wars were draining the treasury, but Alan argued that it wasn't his fault. Alice replied that it wasn't entirely his fault, but she just felt like venting a bit. Even a small war could burn through a tiny kingdom's treasury. Celia added that there was someone who fought a useless war that brought back zero profit, to which Alice agreed. Alan defensively replied that he didn't want that war either, and it was all because their brother Roy agreed to the Empire's request in the first place. Sure, Alan might have pushed things too far, but blaming everything on him was a bit harsh. He's literally fighting for his life but got hit with a full-on budget meeting. Alice slightly acknowledged his rant, but then Alan saw through her and asked what she was really there for. He sarcastically asked if she was coming to play pretend like a happy little sister after so long. With that, Alice revealed that around the time Alan finished escorting the princess, their spies sent in a report. They found a mineral vein in the neutral zone between their kingdom and the Federation. Celia remarked that it was quite the news, while Alan acted surprised. Alice continued, sharing that after some discussion with the ministers, they decided that Alan would go to war and seize it. Furious, Alan told Celia to put the weight stone on his sister's legs. Alan protested so loudly that it reached the soldiers training outside. He argued that Alice couldn't just start a war like that. For the sake of peace, he wanted his sister restrained before she could kill him. For the rest of the day, Alan kept on rejecting Alice's request. He claimed that he wasn't fighting another war. Annoyed, Alice asked how long he was going to keep saying that. Just then, Celia told Alan to just enjoy their first outing in a while. He wanted to, but he was doing everything he could to protect his own peace of mind. Suddenly, Alice spotted a stall selling some candied fruit and she screamed that she wanted one. However, Alan only told her that she was begging for candy money from her broke brother. Just then, he told her that if she gave him an allowance, he would happily buy her one. He basically said, "Yeah, I'll buy it for you, with your money." Alice replied that Celia's joint locks would hit harder next time, which surprised Alan because he was the one getting punished for it. He pleaded with his sweet sister to have some mercy, but Alice teased him for being too soft. She then reminded him that every time he tried going to a brothel, Celia would end up locking his joints. It was practically a castle attraction now. Alan was surprised to know this, and he guessed it must have been a surreal sight. Just then, Celia bought some candied fruit from the stall and she handed it to Alice. Alice thanked her, but Celia insisted that she thank her master. Alan groaned, knowing that Celia had used his wallet again. Still, Alan wasn't going to let that ruin his day, and he looked upon the busy streets ready to enjoy his time there. As they passed by, a lady asked Alice to take a seat in her store while another vendor offered some skewers for Alan. However, the vendor mentioned that he would still charge him. Alan was overjoyed as the kingdom was lively as always. Just then, a man approached Celia and thanked her again for last time. Because of her, his goods didn't spoil. Some of the people there also asked how Roy was doing, and they insisted that he come along next time. Alice said that she would, and she would definitely bring Roy next time. Alan, on the other hand, wanted to remind the people that they were technically royalty. Meanwhile, Celia realized that the Ulmira kingdom was so warm-hearted, which was completely different from the talent-obsessed magic nation. She smiled as Alan and Alice bickered, thinking about how glad she was that her master saved her. Later on, the three of them stopped at a nearby water fountain. There, Alice brought up the topic they had earlier. If they wanted to expand the kingdom, securing that mining zone would be essential. If they could get a new vein and export it to other nations, they would also grow their industries. If there were no one claiming the treasures in that neutral zone, they would have every right to take them for themselves. However, Alan was concerned that if they moved first, the Federation wouldn't just sit quietly. The neutral zone may not belong to anyone, but if another nation were to take it, it would be a different story. No matter what they do, a war would be inevitable. Still, Celia thought that if Alice's intel was correct, this could be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Celia suggested testing the waters, but Alan was worried that the bait was actually poisoned. On top of that, he, the prince, was the one fighting that war. He was not the kind of man who moved just for national profit. He will move for a free trip to the brothel, though. To his surprise, Celia replied that it was a rather unprincely statement. Celia, on the other hand, only cheered him on. Alan started complaining as his maid's icy glare and his sister's sweet cheer were both pushing him straight off a cliff. He wanted to disappear and ditch their country now, more than ever. Alice was disheartened to see her brother's reaction, as she couldn't seem to convince him to make a move, and by the time they could finish discussing it, the Federation might make a move. She wanted to strengthen the kingdom, but she didn't want her brother to get hurt. It was all so complicated for Celia. Back then, Alice discussed the siege for mining rights with Roy. She had already discussed it with the ministers, so it was all up to Roy. Just then, Roy reminded her that Alan was the reason their kingdom had been holding off the 4 great nations. Alice proudly agreed that it was true, but then her perspective changed when Roy mentioned that relying on him forever might not be okay. Alice gripped her skirt in guilt and she answered that it wasn't okay. Roy quickly apologized for being a bit mean, but he offered her some comfort with the thought that their work was similar. He wasn't saying that she should fix it right away, but he wanted to build things up so that one day, Alan would stop wanting to leave the country. Alice recalled that conversation with Roy, and she realized that even if Alan was the kingdom's trump card, relying on him too much wasn't ideal. She would have to talk to the ministers again. Just then, Celia noticed something in the distance, and she urged the others to look. It was a priest and a sister from the holy nation of Ilmgand, and it was rare to see them in a small country like theirs. Alice guessed that they came to spread the faith and gain followers. She also wondered if the saint came with them. Alan thought there was no way, as the saint was second only to the Pope in authority. She was said to perform miracles on God's authority, healing the sick and protecting people from calamity. She was truly a divine woman, and she wouldn't waste time on a small kingdom like Ulmira. Alice sadly agreed that he was right, but still she actually wanted to welcome their mission. When Celia asked why, Alice explained that if they built a church in Ulmira, then if they got attacked, the holy nation would come to protect their followers. Alan was amused to know that she really thought of everything, though he had already expected it from their domestic affairs expert. Alice remarked that it was really Roy's job, but since it overlapped with politics, she had been studying it a bit. Alan then gave her a pat on the head, commending his little sister for a job well done. Alan suggested welcoming the visitors preaching. It was their day off anyway, so they should have some sibling bonding. Alice had expected this from Alan, and she proudly claimed that she loved how deep their family connection ran. Meanwhile, Celia was feeling a bit left out, so she reminded Alan that she was there too. Alan told her that his affection for her was already maxed out, so she shouldn't worry. Celia stuttered and asked if it was true, and Alan confirmed it. When you ask for crumbs and bro drops, the whole bakery. And so for the rest of the day, the three set out to enjoy their day off. After a lot of shopping, Alice still wanted to get souvenirs for Roy. Alan, on the other hand, was struggling with the weight of everything they bought. He whined that he was about to drop dead, and it felt more like marching than shopping. He wondered if he was on a battlefield, and he seriously started to regret not bringing Sumanov with him. Alan's spine is filing for divorce. Just then, Celia handed him a glass of water. She shared that she had already tasted it for poison, so he shouldn't worry because it was safe to drink. Alan took the glass and drank, but as he did, someone approached them, wanting to ask something. Alice sensed that someone was in trouble, but she couldn't see who it was. She urged the others to hurry up, which made Alan complain because she didn't show him kindness like that. To make Alan feel better, Celia told him that Alice was able to talk to her brother casually, which was true sibling love. Alan chuckled, saying that love and baggage were both so heavy. Just then, Alan caught up to Alice, calling her the sister who dumped her luggage on her brother. He asked if she was able to help the poor girl. Alice called out to Alan, informing him that the child was lost. The lost girl claimed that she got separated from the knights and priests escorting her. Though she had been asking people around, no one had seen them. Celia was puzzled as the girl didn't say soldier but a knight of the holy nation. She asked if it meant holy knight, which worried Alan because they might just start a war. The lost girl frantically said no, as they had only come to negotiate with the royal family about building a church in Ulmira. Alice's eyes lit up and she enthusiastically welcomed the girl to the Ulmira kingdom. She also reassured her that they were interested in her proposition. She claimed that it was like getting a whole cake on her birthday, though it wasn't even her birthday. Just then, Alan grabbed his sister, reminding her to calm down because she was scaring the girl with her enthusiasm. However, the girl said that energy was a sign of good health and she claimed it was wonderful. Alan was surprised to know that the girl really embodied purity itself, and even Celia agreed. Still, Alan mentioned that something felt off. If they brought a holy knight as an escort, there should be someone of a higher rank there too, especially for church construction talks. Celia said it was true, and she expected a bishop at the very least. Suddenly, the girl realized that she had forgotten to introduce herself. Her name was Sophia Bennett, and she currently served the Holy Nation as the Saint. As expected, everyone was stunned to hear such a revelation. Not them adopting God's favorite by accident. The mining rights and the Holy Nation's Saint were two completely unrelated events, yet they would soon intertwine, dragging all four nations into war. That is the end of the recap at Chapter 8. Please read the pinned comment about the next part.